This is my true story. I raised my daughter with my own hands after her mother passed away. I thought love would protect me when age made me weak. But one morning, I found out she had told the neighbors I was mentally ill. They believed her. They whispered when I walked by. She wanted my house, my savings, and my silence. But I gave her something else, the truth, printed and sealed by a judge. Before I tell you what happened, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. I raised my daughter with hands that never stopped working. After her mother passed away, the house felt too big and too quiet, but I filled it with her laughter. Every school trip, every doctor visit, every birthday, I was there. I took extra shifts, missed meals, and walked miles just to keep her future safe. I taught her that kindness and truth would always carry her further than money, and for a long time, I believed she understood. When she got older, I paid for her college, her wedding, and even her first home. Each check I signed felt like a promise, a father's invisible handshake saying, "You will never have to struggle like I did." I didn't keep track of what I gave. Love, to me, was never about numbers. She was my only child, my only reason to get up every morning. As the years went by, I grew slower, and the world moved faster. Technology changed, people changed, but my devotion didn't. I still called her every Sunday morning, still baked her favorite apple pie every time she visited. I thought that meant something. I thought that bond between a father and his daughter could never be shaken by time or distance. But I was wrong. Love can be blind when it doesn't expect betrayal. Looking back now, I realized that the first cracks appeared in small ways. She started speaking to me like I was a child, correcting my words, rolling her eyes when I forgot things, reminding me how lucky I was that she checked on me. I thought it was care. I mistook control for concern. When she offered to help with my finances, I felt grateful. She said I shouldn't worry about bills or property taxes anymore. She said she would handle everything, and I trusted her like I always had. I handed her the keys to my accounts, the deeds to my property, and the passwords to my future. I thought I was giving her convenience. In truth, I was giving her power. I didn't realize how dangerous love becomes when it turns one-sided. While I still saw her as my little girl, she had started seeing me as a burden, an old man slowing down her world. What I thought was care became pity. What I thought was family became management. I had worked my whole life for her comfort, and somehow she turned my love into an excuse to erase my voice. But through all of it, I never stopped believing she would come back to kindness. I never stopped believing that the daughter who once held my hand at the fairgrounds, who cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak, was still there somewhere beneath the arrogance and greed. That belief kept me patient. It made me gentle when I should have been cautious. A father's devotion is a powerful thing, but it can also be his greatest weakness. I thought my loyalty was a gift, but in the end, it became her weapon. The same love that built her life gave her the power to break mine. Yet even now, when I look back, I don't regret the giving, because the act of giving wasn't my mistake. The act of trusting without seeing was. The heart has a way of fooling the mind. I told myself that she was just stressed, that she didn't mean the thing she said, that her coldness was just a phase. But deep down, I knew. I could feel it in the pauses of her calls, in the emptiness of her visits, in the way she started looking through me instead of at me. I was no longer her father. I was her inconvenience. Still, I stayed quiet. Because that's what fathers do. They stay until there's nothing left to protect. I thought silence would bring peace. Instead, it brought ruin. But I didn't know that yet. I still believed she loved me the way I loved her. Endlessly, unconditionally, completely. It started quietly, like a breeze before a storm. One morning at the market, people I had known for years avoided my eyes. Mrs. Hale, who once shared her bread with me, turned her cart away. The butchers smiled weakly, but didn't ask how I was doing. Their silence spoke louder than words. At first I thought it was my imagination, But then I overheard two neighbors whispering behind the fruit stall. They said I had lost my mind, that my daughter had told them I was wandering at night and forgetting my own name. My heart froze. In that moment, the world tilted. Every person I had greeted for decades now looked at me as if I were a stranger in my own town. I wanted to laugh, to tell them it wasn't true, but my voice caught in my throat. The rumors spread faster than truth ever could. People love a story more than a fact, and my daughter had given them a story, one where I was the broken old man losing grip on reality. She told everyone she was worried about me, that she was taking over my finances for my own safety. She painted herself as the devoted daughter carrying a burden no one else could understand. Every lie was wrapped in sympathy, every deceit disguised as duty. And people believed her. Because when youth speaks, the world listens. When age defends itself, it sounds like denial. I stopped receiving visitors. Old friends who used to come by for coffee now sent their regards through others. My church group stopped calling. Even my doctor, who had known me for years, began speaking slower during appointments, as if I couldn't comprehend his words anymore. I could feel my world shrinking, not physically, but socially, emotionally, spiritually. Every corner of my home reminded me of her childhood. The walls she'd painted, the stairs she'd stumbled down, the photographs where she smiled beside me. Now those same walls echoed with whispers that didn't belong to her voice, but carried her poison. I sat by the window most nights, watching the empty street, wondering how truth could feel so powerless. The worst part wasn't the isolation, it was the humiliation. The look of pity in people's eyes hurt more than their distance. I began to question myself. Was I really losing touch? Was she right? That's how manipulation works. It doesn't destroy the mind all at once. It erodes it slowly with suggestion and shame. Every time I saw her, she acted gentle, asking if I had taken my medicine, if I remembered to eat, if I was feeling confused. She used those words deliberately, not out of concern, but to build a story she could control. Her kindness became a weapon, sharpened with deceit. And I stood there, playing along because arguing only made me look more unstable. I learned that when someone wants to steal your credibility, they first steal your calm. They want you angry so they can call it madness. They want you hurt so they can call it confusion. I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, but because silence was my shield. I was waiting. I started noticing how deep the damage went. People stopped asking my opinion in meetings, even though I had led them for years. The bank hesitated to process my transactions without her confirmation. Letters arrived addressed to her instead of me. I had become invisible while still alive. One night, I looked in the mirror and saw not the man I used to be, but the reflection of what she wanted others to believe. An old fool on the edge of collapse. That was when I decided it had gone far enough. I would not let her bury me under lies while I was still breathing. I didn't shout, I didn't fight, and I didn't beg for anyone to believe me. Instead, I started writing everything down, every rumor, every message, every suspicious glance. Because when the truth is too soft to be heard, it must be written. Patiently, clearly, like evidence waiting for its moment. That moment would come sooner than she thought. It happened slowly, the kind of betrayal that doesn't scream but poisons every corner of your life. One afternoon, I found out my daughter had gone to the bank pretending to help me sign paperwork. She had applied for full access to my accounts, claiming I was incapable of managing them myself. When the clerk hesitated, she produced a letter, written and signed on my behalf, stating that I gave her permission. I never wrote that letter. My own signature had been copied, perfectly forged. When I confronted her about it, she didn't flinch. She smiled the way liars do when they think they're smarter than love. She said it was for my safety, that I was getting old and forgetful. But I wasn't the one forgetting. She was. She forgot who taught her to read. She forgot who stayed up through every fever, every heartbreak, every lost job. She forgot that I was the man who gave her everything she ever owned. The betrayal cut deeper because it didn't come from a stranger. It came from the child whose first word was Papa. I had raised her to tell the truth, but somewhere along the line she learned that lies opened more doors. What hurt wasn't just the theft of money or trust, it was the theft of dignity. I wasn't just losing control of my home, I was losing control of my name. Within weeks, she began managing my affairs as if I were already gone. She changed the locks for my security. She spoke to neighbors and family as if I were a patient, not a parent. When bills arrived, she handled them and told me not to worry about adult matters. I was being erased from my own life, one signature at a time. Then came the breaking point. She stood before me, calm and confident, explaining that she had filed for legal guardianship over me. She claimed I was mentally unfit and emotionally unstable. I stood there, speechless, while she outlined her plan to control every piece of my existence, the home I built, the pension I earned, the savings I kept for her future. She wanted them all, and she wanted the world to think it was mercy. In that moment, I realized something cruel about love. It doesn't always fade because of distance or death. Sometimes it rots while sitting across from you, smiling with your own blood's reflection in its eyes. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't beg her to stop. I simply walked to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the floor until night came. The weight of betrayal doesn't hit like a punch. It settles like ash, layer by layer, until breathing feels heavy. That night, I replayed every memory in my head. Her first steps, her first report card, her first car. I remembered how proud I had been the day she told me she wanted to make me proud. And I laughed, not out of joy, but disbelief. Somewhere, between wanting her to succeed and teaching her to fight, I had created someone who saw love as leverage. I knew then that words would not save me. People already believed her story. If I tried to defend myself, I would sound exactly like what she said I was: unstable, paranoid, bitter. I had only one choice: to stay silent and gather proof. So I started writing everything down: dates, names, witnesses. I collected every message she sent, every bank notice that arrived. I spoke to no one, but I listened to everyone. Betrayal had turned me into something she couldn't recognize: cautious, strategic, patient. She had underestimated me. She thought I was too old to fight back. But she forgot that age doesn't dull wisdom, it sharpens it. And while she was busy telling the world that her father had lost his mind, I was quietly building the case that would prove she had lost her soul. After that day, silence became my only companion. The walls of my own home began to close in, not because of age or illness, but because of her lies. Friends stopped visiting. Neighbors who once waved from across the street now looked away. My world had been reduced to whispers, pity, and suspicion, all painted by the brush of my daughter's deceit. When people believe you've lost your mind, they stop listening. Every word becomes proof of madness. If I said I was fine, they'd say I was in denial. If I showed anger, they'd call it instability. I realized there was no way to defend myself without feeding her story. So I stopped speaking altogether. Silence became my language, and observation my weapon. The loneliness was unbearable at first. I would sit by the window, watching people pass, wondering how truth could become so invisible. My house, once filled with laughter and music, felt like a museum of betrayal. Every photo of her as a child was now a portrait of something I'd lost, not a daughter, but faith itself. At night, I could hear her moving through the house, talking on the phone, pretending to care. "He's not doing well," she'd say in a gentle tone, rehearsing concern for an audience that couldn't see her smile. I sat quietly in my room, listening, memorizing. Lies leave traces, the same way guilt leaves cracks in a voice. And I began collecting those cracks. When family came to visit, they no longer spoke to me directly. They spoke about me, as if I weren't there. "He seems confused," one cousin whispered. "She's doing the right thing taking care of him," another replied. They didn't notice I was standing right behind them. I realized then how easily perception replaces truth. Once a lie is told with confidence, people start building fences around it, protecting it like it's their own. I stopped opening the door to anyone. I stopped answering the phone. I knew every conversation would twist into more rumors. My daughter thought isolation would break me. What she didn't know was that isolation became my shield. Alone, I could think clearly. I could remember everything: the documents, the accounts, the forged letters. I could see the whole picture without noise. Every morning, I forced myself to write, not to the world, but to myself. Dates, times, details. Every message she sent, every check she cashed, every moment she tried to rewrite. It became my quiet rebellion. Each line of ink on paper was another stone in the foundation of the truth I was building. But even in the silence, the ache lingered. I missed hearing her voice without poison in it. I missed believing that love was enough. There were moments in the early hours before dawn when I questioned everything. Maybe I really was the problem. Maybe I had been too strict, too proud, too blind. But then I'd remember the forged documents, the smirk when she lied, the emptiness in her eyes. No, it wasn't me. It was greed. It was pride. It was the hunger for power that eats away at love until nothing human is left. She didn't visit to care anymore. She came to collect. Every conversation turned into a transaction. She asked about my will, about assets, about insurance. Her eyes no longer saw a father. They saw a signature waiting to be claimed. I realized I was living in a cage built from paper, and she held the key. But what she didn't know was that I was learning how to pick locks. In those long, empty weeks, I studied her moves, the way she handled my accounts, the timing of her phone calls, the phrases she used when speaking to lawyers and banks. I learned her routine better than she knew mine. Betrayal had turned me into something sharper, cautious, deliberate, patient. By the time she started preparing to have me declared legally incompetent, I was already steps ahead. I had copies of everything, notarized, time-stamped, and stored away. I had the proof she thought I'd never be clever enough to find. So, while she built her case in the shadows, I built mine in silence. The difference was, mine was the truth. And soon, silence would speak louder than her lies ever could. The night I decided to act, the house was silent, the kind of silence that carries a pulse, heavy and aware. I sat at my old wooden desk, surrounded by stacks of papers that had once meant security, but now felt like weapons. I realized that my daughter's strength came from one thing: control. She controlled the story, the accounts, and the perception of who I was. If I was going to take my life back, I needed to take those things from her, quietly, completely, and legally. I began by gathering everything that proved I was still capable. Every bank statement, every letter I'd written, every bill I'd paid on time. These small details, the ones she thought meant nothing, were proof that my mind was still sharp. I contacted my old lawyer, a man who had handled my affairs years ago before my daughter pushed him out. I didn't tell him the full story yet. I simply asked to review my estate documents and medical certifications. He agreed, curious but respectful, unaware that this meeting would change everything. Over the next few days, I visited my doctor, not for medicine, but for evaluation. I explained calmly that I needed an official record of my mental health. He conducted the full test: memory, logic, emotional reasoning. I passed with ease. The moment he signed that certificate of clarity, I felt the weight of weeks begin to lift. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing. At home, I started collecting evidence. Every time she spoke in that sweet tone of manipulation, I pressed record on my phone. Every time she left a note pretending to care, I photographed it. I found bank statements showing transfers she made on my behalf. I printed call logs where she'd contacted institutions pretending to be me. She had been thorough, but not smarter than experience. Greed always leaves fingerprints, and I was tracing every one of them. I knew that confronting her would achieve nothing. A liar fights loudest when cornered, and I didn't want to fight. I wanted proof, so I played the part she expected. I nodded when she spoke, pretended to forget small details, acted confused when she mentioned money. She thought she was winning, that I was slipping further into the fog she'd built around me. What she didn't know was that every word she said was becoming part of my case file. Once I had gathered enough, I met my lawyer again. This time, I told him everything. He listened without interruption, his face turning from disbelief to anger. By the time I handed him the recordings and documents, he said nothing more. He just began writing. Together, we built a timeline. Every lie, every withdrawal, every manipulation. We filed for a legal review of her actions, focusing on fraud, financial exploitation, and defamation. It was no longer a family dispute. It was a matter of justice. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork or the planning. It was pretending. Sitting across from her at breakfast, listening to her speak as though she were the victim, was unbearable. But I learned to smile while holding the truth in my pocket. Revenge, I discovered, doesn't always burn with rage. Sometimes it waits with patience. I began meeting with an independent social worker, someone my lawyer recommended. She visited the house, observed my behavior, spoke to neighbors, and took notes. I didn't interfere. I let her see everything my daughter had done to protect me. The control, the condescension, the falsified concern. When she left, I knew the truth had finally stepped outside those walls. A month later, the report was ready. It was clear, precise, and damning. It stated that I was mentally fit, fully capable of independent decision-making, and that there was evidence of coercion and manipulation by my daughter. That single document, signed and stamped, became my weapon, not to destroy her, but to expose her. The night before I handed everything to the court, I sat by the window and looked out at the quiet street. The same neighbors who once looked at me with pity would soon know the truth. But I didn't feel anger anymore, just relief. I wasn't fighting to win back pride. I was fighting to win back peace. By morning, my lawyer had filed everything. My daughter would soon receive her first legal notice, a request for explanation and proof of her claims. The storm she created was finally turning toward her. I had been called crazy, old, and delusional. But the truth was simple. I had never been clearer in my life. And soon, the world would see exactly who had lost their mind and who had never lost anything at all. The morning of the hearing was gray, calm, and almost too quiet, the kind of quiet that sits heavy before a storm. I wore my old suit, the one I had kept for family weddings and rare celebrations. It hung loose on my shoulders now, but it made me feel steady. The courtroom was only a few miles away, yet the journey felt like a lifetime. Every street corner, every passing face reminded me of the years I'd spent believing in love that no longer existed. When I arrived, my lawyer greeted me with a firm nod. No words needed. The documents were already arranged, the evidence sealed and numbered. Across the room sat my daughter, radiant in confidence, surrounded by her legal counsel. She spoke easily, laughing, completely unaware that the mountain beneath her feet was hollow. Watching her sit there, poised as if the world belonged to her, hurt more than anything else. This was the child I had taught to stand tall, now using that strength to destroy the very man who gave it to her. When the session began, her lawyer painted me as unstable, fragile, and confused. He spoke of my episodes, my memory lapses, and my emotional outbursts. Each lie was polished, practiced, and precise. People in the gallery nodded in sympathy for her, the dutiful daughter caring for her ailing father. I sat still, my hands folded, listening as my life was rewritten word by word. Then, the judge turned to me. His tone was firm but curious. He asked if I had anything to say. My lawyer stood and handed over a single folder, neat, labeled, and thick. Inside were medical evaluations from certified professionals declaring full mental stability. There were recorded calls and written transcriptions of her plotting, laughing, and manipulating the system. There were signed documents showing she'd forged my permission for account access. And at the very top was a simple, undeniable truth, a statement of clarity that no performance could erase. As the judge flipped through the papers, the silence in the courtroom deepened. My daughter's lawyer leaned forward, whispering urgently, but she sat frozen. Her face began to shift, confusion first, then fear, and finally shame. When the recordings played aloud, her own voice filled the room like poison made audible. "Once he's declared unfit, everything becomes mine." The words echoed, sharp and final. I didn't look at her. I looked at the judge, and he looked back with the quiet understanding of someone who had seen too many children betray their blood for power. For the first time in months, I felt air move freely in my lungs. The truth didn't need anger or noise. It needed evidence, and I had brought plenty. Every whisper she had spread, every signature she had stolen, was now neatly arranged in front of the court. The same paper she thought would prove my incompetence had now become the proof of her deceit. Her lawyer tried to recover, claiming miscommunication and stress, but the damage was done. The judge leaned forward, hands clasped, and said in a tone that cut through the room, "This case is no longer about incapacity. It's about exploitation." My daughter lowered her head. The crowd shifted, murmuring softly. Neighbors who had come to watch the crazy old man's downfall now looked at me differently. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't offer anger or explanation. I simply said that love without truth becomes control, and control without love becomes cruelty. I had spent my life building her dreams. Now, I had to protect my peace from them. The judge nodded once, and the gavel fell with a sound that seemed to echo across all the empty nights I had spent doubting myself. As I walked out of the courtroom, people parted silently. My daughter remained seated, pale and motionless, while her own words replayed in her head, the evidence she had created against herself. The lies that had buried me were now her own trap, and I hadn't raised my voice once. Outside, the air was fresh, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't feel victorious. I felt vindicated. Truth, I realized, doesn't roar. It whispers at the right moment, and the world finally listens. The courtroom had done more than clear my name. It had restored my dignity. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I realized something simple and powerful. She had tried to bury me with lies, but all she'd done was plant the seeds of her own undoing. The day after the verdict, everything changed. Not because I spoke, but because the truth finally had a voice of its own. News traveled fast. The same neighbors who once whispered about my confused mind now spoke in hushed disbelief about what they had heard in court. The same woman who once crossed the street to avoid me now stopped to say, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Carter." But I didn't need their pity. What I wanted, and what I finally had, was my dignity back. My daughter, however, couldn't hide. The story spread beyond our small town. Court reporters covered it in the local paper. Elderly father proves competence. Daughter found guilty of defamation. Her name appeared beneath mine, this time not as caretaker, but as defendant. She had tried to make me invisible. Now she was the one everyone looked at, exposed in the light she once used against me. For weeks, she tried to reach out, through letters, through mutual friends, even through relatives who once believed her lies. I didn't respond. Every apology sounded rehearsed, every word too late. What does an apology mean when it comes only after reputation, love, and trust have already been buried? Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about letting her off the hook. It was about freeing myself from the weight of her choices. She had built her story on perception, and perception is fragile. The moment it cracks, the truth rushes through like a flood. People began to see the pattern, how she had controlled my finances, spoken for me in public, and turned sympathy into strategy. I didn't have to say a single word anymore. Her own history spoke louder than I ever could. The media attention was uncomfortable, but I didn't shy from it. When a journalist came to my door and asked what I wanted people to know, I told him one simple thing: age doesn't mean absence of mind. That line made it to print, and it spread across community pages. Elderly men from nearby towns began writing letters, saying they too had been silenced or dismissed. My story had become a mirror, and in it, many saw their own reflection. My daughter's fall wasn't dramatic. It was slow and quiet. Her friends withdrew, her colleagues hesitated to associate with her, and the pride she had worn like armor began to crumble. She was forced to move out of her house, pay the damages, and live with the weight of her actions. I didn't celebrate it. I simply watched, knowing that she had finally met the consequences she once thought only others deserved. At night, I still thought of her, not as the woman who betrayed me, but as the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder. The court couldn't erase that image from my heart. It's strange how love and pain can live side by side, how a parent's heart can still ache for the very child who broke it. But some lessons are only learned through loss, and she had to lose everything before she understood what respect truly meant. In time, people stopped talking. The noise faded, as it always does. Life moved on, quieter, but clearer. My reputation had been restored, but something deeper had been repaired too: my belief in myself. For months, I had doubted my own sanity, wondering if maybe I really was the confused old man she made me out to be. The court had proved my mind was sound, but I no longer needed that paper to know it. I had lived through deceit, isolation, and humiliation, and I had come out whole. One evening, as I sat on my porch, a familiar car slowed in front of my house. She didn't step out. She just looked at me through the window, eyes red, face pale, expression unreadable. For a moment, it felt like time folded back on itself. I could almost see the daughter I'd raised, the one who once loved me. But the moment passed. The car drove away, and I stayed seated, calm and still. Some goodbyes don't need words, they need silence. The truth had done what I could not. It had spoken for me, exposed what was hidden and rewritten what was twisted. I didn't need revenge. I needed peace. And in that stillness, I realized something simple. Justice isn't about punishment, it's about restoration. I didn't win in court. I was simply seen again, fully, clearly, as the man I had always been. The day of the final verdict felt lighter than any morning I could remember. The air carried a quiet confidence, the kind that only truth can give after surviving months of noise. When I stepped into the courtroom, I wasn't afraid anymore. My hands no longer trembled. My lawyer greeted me with a nod, calm and assured. Everything that fear had once stolen from me had now returned. Across the room, my daughter sat with her eyes fixed on the floor. The arrogance that once wrapped around her like armor had vanished. The judge entered, and the silence that followed felt almost sacred. Papers rustled, pens clicked, and then, with measured words, the judge began reading the decision. Each sentence felt like a bell tolling softly, a slow, deliberate rhythm of truth, restoring balance. The court found her guilty of defamation, coercion, and attempted financial exploitation. Every right she had tried to strip from me was reinstated. Every account she had manipulated was frozen, and every false report she had filed was dismissed in full. When the judge said, "Mr. Carter is mentally sound and fully capable of managing his affairs," I closed my eyes for a brief moment. It wasn't pride I felt. It was peace. A kind of peace that only comes after walking through humiliation and refusing to lose yourself along the way. The judge then turned to her, voice low but sharp. He spoke about greed, about moral duty, about the sacred bond between a parent and a child. He said betrayal by blood was not just cruelty, it was cowardice. My daughter didn't speak. Her tears came quietly, one after another, falling onto the table before her. The same table where she once sat confident and certain that the world would believe her version of the story. The order was final. She was to issue a public apology, pay damages, and relinquish control over any shared property or assets. Her request for guardianship was denied permanently. I didn't look at her as the gavel struck the desk. I had already said everything I needed to, through silence, patience, and proof. When I stood to leave, the room shifted. People moved aside. Some nodded respectfully, others avoided my eyes out of guilt for believing her lies. Outside, cameras flashed, reporters murmured, but I walked through them without stopping. My story didn't need another audience. The truth had already been seen. Later that day, the court's written verdict arrived at my doorstep. I read it slowly, line by line, until the final sentence. The plaintiff, Mr. John Carter, has been wrongfully defamed and deprived of his dignity, which is hereby restored. I placed the paper on my desk and stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just ink. It was the written proof that I had not imagined the cruelty, that I hadn't lost my mind, that I was still the man I always knew myself to be. My daughter's name would appear in legal archives now, not as my protector, but as my accuser proven false. I didn't take joy in that. There was no satisfaction in her fall, only relief that the truth had finally stood taller than her lies. Revenge, I learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the sound of a gavel falling in your favor. In the days that followed, she tried again to call. I didn't answer. Forgiveness doesn't always require conversation. Sometimes it's simply the choice not to hate. I packed up my belongings, sold the house, and left the neighborhood that had once looked at me with pity. I wanted to start fresh, somewhere without whispers or glances, somewhere where I could be just an old man enjoying his tea again, not the headline of someone's scandal. That night, before leaving for good, I stood at the doorway and looked around the empty home. The walls that had once echoed with her voice now stood still, hollow, and honest. There was no laughter, no deceit, just the faint sound of peace returning. I whispered softly, not to her, but to myself, "You're free now." And I was. The verdict didn't just end a case. It ended a lifetime of silence, of walking on eggshells, of being afraid to be misunderstood. It gave me something priceless, not money, not property, but proof that truth, when patient, always wins. As I stepped outside for the last time, I didn't look back. Some stories end with applause. Mine ended with the simple sound of a door closing, behind me, quietly, completely, forever. When the dust finally settled, I moved far away, not to escape her, but to find myself again. I found a quiet little town where nobody knew my story, where my name wasn't followed by whispers or pity. The first morning there, I woke to the sound of birds instead of rumors. The air felt cleaner, as if even the wind had been waiting to breathe freely with me. I rented a small house near the edge of town. Nothing grand, just enough for one person and a few memories. The walls were bare at first, but that emptiness felt like a blessing. No shadows of old arguments, no lingering echoes of accusation, just peace. I unpacked slowly, carefully choosing what to bring from the past. Only what mattered. Only what reminded me that I had survived. Every morning, I brewed my tea and sat by the window. The steam rose like forgiveness, curling gently toward the light. No one spat in it, no one questioned my sanity. It was just me, the tea, and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't accuse, but heals. For years, my mornings had been filled with dread. Now, they were filled with warmth. I joined the local library club, a small circle of retired men and women who met every Thursday. We shared stories, read poems, and talked about life without judgment. No one cared who I had been in the city or what scandal my name had once carried. I was just John, the old man who always brought biscuits to share. It was strange how simple acceptance could feel like luxury after years of being doubted. In time, I started helping others, men who came to the library shaking with the same fear I once knew. Some were fighting their own families over wills. Some were being silenced by children who thought age meant ignorance. I told them what I had learned, that the truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs patience, paper, and proof. I helped them find lawyers, wrote letters, even attended a few hearings. Watching others reclaim their voices became my way of staying alive with purpose. One afternoon, I received a letter from my daughter. It wasn't full of excuses or anger, just one simple line. I understand now. There was no apology, no explanation, and I didn't need one. Understanding was enough. I didn't reply. Sometimes peace isn't about reopening wounds, but letting them close quietly. The house I built for her still stood back in the city, but I never went back. I had learned that home isn't made of bricks or deeds, it's made of respect. And once that's broken, no roof can make you feel safe again. My peace didn't come from winning in court, it came from walking away without hate. I started gardening, something I hadn't done since my wife passed. The soil between my fingers reminded me that even broken things can grow again. I planted roses, lilies, and a few old herbs my wife used to love. When they bloomed, the air around my little home filled with life. People walking by would smile and say, "You've got the best garden in town, Mr. Carter." I'd smile back and say, "It just needed care, that's all." And that's the truth of everything, really. People, plants, relationships, they all just need care. Without it, even love wilts. Some evenings I'd sit on the porch with my cup of tea and watch the sunset paint the sky. The world felt bigger now, not because I had more, but because I had less. Less noise, less expectation, less pain. I'd watch the light fade, knowing that I had lived through the darkest nights and still found my dawn. There were moments I missed my daughter, but not the person she had become. I missed the child she once was, the one who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her stories. Sometimes I'd imagine her as that little girl again, smiling, innocent, untainted by greed or pride. Maybe that version of her still lived somewhere deep inside. Maybe one day she'd find her way back to it. Until then, I had my peace, quiet, earned, and honest. I didn't rebuild my life with anger. I rebuilt it with silence, patience, and faith that truth always finds its place. I had spent too long defending my sanity, my worth, my name. Now I needed only one thing: stillness. And every morning when I sipped my tea, I could taste it. Not bitterness, not revenge, but freedom. Now, as an old man, I sit by my window each morning and look at the world differently. Time has softened many of the sharp edges that once cut deep. The anger that used to sit heavy on my chest has turned into quiet understanding. I no longer ask why things happened the way they did. Some questions are meant to remain unanswered so we can move on. When I think of my daughter now, I don't see the woman who dragged my name through the mud. I see the little girl I once taught to tie her shoes, the one who used to draw hearts on my birthday cards and call me her hero. Somewhere along the line, that innocence was replaced by ambition and fear. And though her betrayal wounded me deeply, I have learned that bitterness only poisons the one who holds it. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without letting the memory own you. It means understanding that people sometimes act out of greed, pride, or weakness, and then choosing not to let those moments define your entire story. My story, after all, isn't about what she did to me. It's about what I did after. The court gave me justice, but time gave me peace. And peace, I've learned, is the better victory. Sometimes, the neighbors in this new town ask me why I live alone. I just smile and say, because I earned it. They don't know the history behind those words, but I do. They don't know what it means to sit in a house built not from money, but from survival. Every wall around me stands on the foundation of truth, not rumors, not lies, not manipulation. In the quiet of the evenings, I often think about the strange balance of life. The same hands that once raised my daughter also built the documents that cleared my name. The same voice that once read her bedtime stories defended me in court. The same love that made me vulnerable also made me strong. It's a strange, beautiful contradiction, how pain can teach us strength and betrayal can teach us wisdom. There are still days when I catch myself wondering if she ever truly understood what she lost. Money can be earned again. Reputation can be repaired. But the trust between a parent and child, once broken, can never return the same way. I didn't take revenge to hurt her. I did it to reclaim my self-respect, because no matter how much we love our children, we must never let them erase who we are. When people ask for advice, I tell them one simple thing. Never trade your peace for someone else's comfort. Love them, yes. Forgive them, if you can. But don't let their cruelty convince you that your silence is weakness. Sometimes, silence is strategy. Sometimes, walking away is the loudest thing you can do. I've seen too many parents die with regret, holding on to hope that one day their ungrateful children will change. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But the truth is, you can't heal someone by destroying yourself. You can only teach by example, and then let life do the rest. So I live simply. My days are slow but full. I drink my tea, read my paper, tend my garden, and thank the heavens for the peace I fought to keep. My story may not have a happy ending in the way people expect. There were no tearful reunions, no grand apologies, but it has something better: closure. The world once thought I was crazy. My daughter once thought I was weak. But I proved them wrong, not by shouting, not by fighting, but by surviving. And that, I think, is what true strength looks like when you're old. I still keep one framed photograph of her on my desk, not to remember the pain, but the love that once existed. Because no matter what she did, I will always be the man who raised her, fed her, and believed in her. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. My story isn't one of revenge, it's one of dignity. So when people ask me how I feel about it all now, I say this: she called me crazy. But I let the law, the truth, and time prove who really lost their mind. And every time I say it, I smile. Not out of spite, but out of peace. Because in the end, I didn't just win the case, I won myself back.